Convinced by love, a thief is ready to surrender to the authorities in order to prove himself to his beloved. Along the way, he discovers that the authorities are far from clean themselves. In fact, they are much dirtier than he could ever imagine. The story begins with Tom Dolan, a former U.S. Marine who has become an expert bank robber. He doesn't rob for wealth, but for the sheer thrill of it, never spending a single cent of his stolen money. The authorities have dubbed him the in-and-out bandit, but that's all they know about him. Tom is incredibly clever, using his knowledge of demolitions to access vaults with ease. One day, while depositing his money, Tom meets Annie Wilkins, a psychology student working at the bank to pay her bills. Their chemistry is immediate, and they start chatting as if they've known each other for years. As Annie processes his deposit, Tom can't help but smile, feeling Cupid's arrow strike again. A year later, the two are still together, and Tom surprises Annie by showing her a house in a wealthy neighborhood. It's for sale, and Tom suggests they could move in together. Annie, caught off guard, confesses that she hasn't reached that stage with anyone since her divorce. Though nervous about the possibility of another heartbreak, she knows Tom isn't like her ex. Despite her initial hesitation, her doubts give way to excitement, and they agree to take the next step. However, Tom has another confession to make. He has been grappling with whether or not to reveal his secret life as the in-and-out bandit to Annie. Ultimately, he chooses honesty and decides to turn himself in. He contacts FBI agent Sam Baker, confessing every detail of his robberies, including the $9 million he's stolen. He offers to return the money in exchange for a reduced sentence, visitor rights, and other privileges. Baker, though intrigued by the confession, doesn't fully believe him. After all, he's fielded countless calls from people claiming to be the infamous bandit. Still, Tom is persistent, and Baker eventually agrees to meet. He assigns agents John Nivens and Ramon Hall to handle the case, both of whom assume it's another hoax. Meanwhile, we meet FBI agent Sean Mayers, who is going through a tough divorce. His wife kept the house, leaving him with just his dog for company. Mayers often vents to his superior, Baker, about his frustrations. Back at the hotel where Tom is waiting, the agents take their time, leaving him anxious. Tom uses his last moments of freedom to call Annie, expressing his pride in her before preparing to face his fate. When Nivens and Hall finally show up, they don't believe Tom is the bandit, but as he describes his method of robbing banks, targeting older vaults from before the 1950s that were easier to crack, they begin to realize he might be telling the truth. Things take a dangerous turn when Nivens, the more corrupt of the two, sees an opportunity to steal the $9 million for himself. Hall, while reluctant, goes along with Nivens' plan. Tom, now caught in a deadly game, must outsmart the agents before they can silence him for good. As the authorities' true corruption comes to light, Tom must rely on his skills and cunning to survive, not just for his sake, but for Annie's as well. Tom's strategy for robbing banks was as clever as it was precise. His targets were always banks located next to abandoned buildings, which allowed him easy access to the vault. On Friday nights, he would slip into these adjacent buildings, using a powerful drill, patience, and a few well-placed explosives to crack open the vault doors. By the time the weekend was over, Tom would be long gone, leaving no trace behind. He was so meticulous that he would cover up any evidence with plaster and paint, making it look like he'd never been there at all. That's why they called him the in-and-out bandit. Despite Tom's detailed confession, the agents, Nivens and Hall, still weren't entirely convinced. They asked him to show them the money, and Tom agreed, under the condition that the terms of his plea deal, including a reduced sentence, remained intact. Ever the gentleman, Tom offered to escort them to the storage facility where the money was kept, but the agents decided to go alone, taking the key he provided. At the storage unit, Nivens and Hall initially found nothing significant. But then they stumbled upon a stash of cash, not just a few bills, but wads of it. Realizing Tom had been telling the truth, Nivens saw an opportunity. With the excuse of confiscating stolen goods, He took the boxes of money and loaded them into the car, fully intending to keep it all for himself. Tom warned them that their plan wouldn't work, but Hall, despite his reservations, was convinced by Nivens that the money was a well-deserved bonus for their hard work. Just as the agents were about to leave, they ran into Annie, who was still working as a manager at the warehouse. The agents introduced themselves as friends of Tom, claiming they were helping her move. Unaware of the truth, Annie bought their story, thinking it was all part of Tom's surprise about their potential new house. Meanwhile, back at the FBI, Agent Mayers informs Baker that Tom has been calling repeatedly, which surprises Baker since he thought Nivens and Hall were handling the situation. When Baker tries to reach the agents and gets no response, his suspicions grow. As Nivens and Hall return to confront Tom, Nivens cuts straight to the point, pulling a gun on him. Tom, realizing he's the only loose end in their plan, quickly offers them a deal. He only had $3 million in the storage unit, but the other $6 million could be theirs if they let him live. Before the agents can decide, Baker arrives, forcing them to play along and act as though everything is under control. Tom subtly signals to Baker what's really going on. However, before Baker can react, Hall shoots him. Stunned by the turn of events, Hall hesitates, and Tom takes the opportunity to fight back. He throws himself out the window, crashing onto the street below, where Annie happens to be arriving to surprise him. Instead, she's the one who ends up shocked. Taking advantage of the chaos, Tom grabs Annie and they flee in their car. The agents, realizing they're running out of options, give chase. As they speed through the streets, Tom confesses the truth to Annie about his criminal past, explaining that he was trying to turn himself in before everything spiraled out of control. Hall, meanwhile, is furious at Nivens for shooting their superior. But Nivens coldly responds that he plans to frame Tom for the murder, revealing that he had taken Tom's gun during the earlier fight. As they corner Tom and Annie in an alley, the couple manages to escape on foot, hiding in a nearby parking lot. Luckily, the agents don't spot them. But Tom's problems are far from over, as Annie is furious about his lies. She demands to know how many people he's killed, to which Tom responds that he's never killed anyone, not even when he served in the Marines. In fact, during his time in the Army, he didn't arm bombs. He disarmed landmines. Tom reveals the real reason behind his bank-robbing spree. After returning from the war, his mother died of pneumonia while he was deployed, and his father, devastated by the loss, spiraled into depression. To make matters worse, his father was accused of embezzlement and fired from his job, losing his pension. With no will to live, his father tragically ended his own life by driving his car into a tree. Tom admits that he stole for the thrill, not for the money, as a way to cope with the pain of losing his family. He never even spent the stolen cash, planning to buy the new house with his savings from his military service. Tom's descent into crime began after the tragic death of his father, who lost everything, including his life, due to embezzlement charges orchestrated by his boss. Seeking revenge, Tom infiltrated that very bank and stole the money. He kept stealing afterward because it made him feel alive, until he met Annie. She gave him the same feeling of exhilaration, but through love, not crime. For her, Tom decided to stop his heists and change his life. Meanwhile, FBI agent Mayers arrives at the scene of Baker's murder, where Nivens and Hall, the corrupt agents, claim Tom is the killer. Conveniently, they leave out any mention of the stolen money. Mayers grows suspicious, especially since it doesn't make sense for Tom to have killed Baker if he wasn't actually guilty. Tom, now fully aware that he's been framed, asks Annie to leave the city for her safety. Before she goes, she promises to wait for him, trusting he will prove his innocence. Determined to expose the truth, Tom starts investigating Nivens and Hall, tracking down their addresses online. At the same time, Mayers assigns the corrupt agents to track down Annie, believing she's the key to finding Tom. However, Annie, brave and resourceful, discovers a security recording at her workplace showing Nivens and Hall stealing the money. She calls Tom, informing him of the video, But before she can leave, the agents catch her. Annie tries to fend them off, stabbing Nivens in the leg with scissors, but she's overpowered. Nivens prepares to kill her, but Hall lies, saying she's already dead, and secretly takes the security footage behind Nivens' back. Shortly after, Tom arrives at the warehouse, finding Annie unconscious. He rushes her to the hospital, but his mission is no longer just about clearing his name. It's about revenge. Through Mayers, Tom manages to contact Nivens, warning him that he's coming. Despite acting nonchalant, Nivens starts to feel the pressure. Meanwhile, Hall begins to have doubts about his partner's increasingly reckless behavior. As they drive through the city, Tom is recognized by a patrol car, triggering a high-speed chase. Using quick thinking, Tom causes the pursuing car to crash, but federal authorities soon catch on to his location. Spotting the corrupt agent's car, Tom crashes into them head-on. A gunfight ensues between Tom and Nivens, but Tom escapes. Mayers later finds their bullet-riddled van and spots a suspicious figure nearby. Tom. A chase follows, but this time Tom lures Mayers into a trap. During their struggle, Tom overpowers Mayers and pins him, gun in hand. However, instead of pulling the trigger, he reveals the truth. Nivens killed Baker, and possibly Annie as well. With no news about Annie's condition, Tom gives Mayers Hal's gun, asking him not to pursue him, as he plans to clear his name on his own. Taking refuge in a motel, Tom contacts the hospital and learns that while Annie is still alive, she remains unable to speak. Meanwhile, Nivens, fearing loose ends, plots to finish Annie off himself after Hal expresses doubts about the plan. But when Nivens sneaks into Annie's room, he finds Mayers watching over her, forcing him to abort the mission. The next day, Mayers confronts Nivens, asking why Tom, the bandit, would try to incriminate him. Nivens lies, claiming Tom is simply a desperate man trying to avoid responsibility. Mayers grows suspicious, especially when Hal returns his gun without explaining how he recovered it. Nivens warns Hal that they must stick together, threatening his family if he refuses. Later that night, Hal is ambushed at home, guilt-ridden over his role in the crimes. He hands over the memory card with evidence of the warehouse robbery and confesses the location of the shelter where the stolen money is kept. He also warns Tom that Nivens plans to kill Annie. Tom wastes no time, rescuing Annie from the hospital and taking her to the motel. He contacts Myers, assuring him that Annie had no involvement in the robberies and promising to handle things his way. Tom then begins assembling a contraption from supplies he bought at the hardware store, telling Annie that even if his plan works, he'll still face prison time. She promises to visit him whenever she can. The next day, Tom's plan unfolds. He calls Nivens, counting down from 10. Terrified, Nivens narrowly escapes his house just before a bomb planted by Tom explodes. Though Nivens flees, Tom reminds him that if he truly wanted him dead, he would be. Panicked, Nivens contacts Hal and insists they must escape with the money. Meanwhile, Tom sends Annie to give Mayers the evidence against the corrupt agents, including the location of the remaining money, revealing that Tom is indeed the legendary bandit. Tom breaks into the shelter, confronting Nivens and Hal. Nivens, in a fit of rage, shoots Hal with his own gun. A shootout ensues, and Nivens escapes with the money. Tom calls him, telling him to check under his seat, where Nivens finds another bomb, this one a pressure-sensitive device. Forced to stop, Nivens waits for the bomb squad, only to discover the bomb has no detonator. Mayers orders Nivens' immediate arrest, recovering the money and receiving a recording of Nivens confessing to Baker's murder. Impressed by Tom's cleverness, Mayers remarks that in another life, he would have hired him as an FBI agent. Tom replies that in another life, he would have gladly accepted. He then surrenders himself, ready to serve his sentence and become the man Annie deserves. Hey there, it's the narrator here. If you're loving these movie recap and want to stay up to date with all the latest, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. There's so much more in the future. And trust me, you don't want to miss a single twist or turn. So go ahead, join the family and let's keep the story rolling.